So we literally just started Men, Their Mothers and Masculinity, two-part series, Psalms 11 verse 3. You got it?
When wicked people have destroyed the foundations, what can righteous people do?
Okay.
When wicked people have destroyed the foundations, what can righteous people do?
Okay, so very, very simple, but and it's in context of what the entire psalm is talking about. But I want to draw out the principle that is in there. If foundations are destroyed, what can righteous people do? And I love that, because what it's really teaching us is that if you are saved, your position with God changes, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your situations change. Okay? Salvation means that your relationship with God is restored or repaired, but it doesn't necessarily mean that what you're going through here on earth is going to be restored and repaired. And what this psalm is telling us is, if wicked people mess up the foundations, then righteous people struggle. So, in other words, my righteousness does not stop bad things from happening. If the foundations are not there, my relationship with God, my righteousness, my walk doesn't undo all of those things. I still need to be aware and deal with those things. And there is no other foundation worse destroyed in our society than the foundation of the home, right? If the home is broken, then women are broken. If the home is broken, then men are broken. If the foundations of the home is not there, how God set it up, then the question is, what can the righteous do? What can the righteous do is this: we need to work on some things, right? We need to develop some things. The results, what we're aiming to do in these men's discipleship classes is to rebuild those foundations, or at least give you a head start, so that when you start your own family, you have a head start in those foundations. The first woman every one of us would really truly love, or have a bond to, if you want to put it that way, is our mums. Again, all different situations, different upbringings, but generally speaking, most men are devoted to their mums. Okay, we'd all agree on that. We depend on our mums from the first time that we have some sort of resemblance to human life, right? We're in the womb for 9 months, and it's in those 9 months she's taking care of us, she's singing songs, she's watching what she eats, she's making sure she's looking after you, you know what I mean? Like there's a bond that's created even in the womb. And then after you come out of the womb, you're then nursed by your mum primarily. Dads don't usually, there's some things we can't do, all right? We don't usually do the first couple of months too heavily handed. Most dads, anyway, that I know of, don't do that. We are involved, but we're not as involved as the mum. So you're in her womb for 9 months, you come out, now you are, Now you're dependent upon her for feeding, for education, for discipline, for all these kind of things. And especially if you were raised without much input from your dad, then mum becomes this central figure, the Godhead or the God figure of the home. And she shapes your view of life as a young man. As you're entering into adolescence, it's usually mum that shapes a view, even if dad's around. Right? You want to do some things, she says, no, that's dangerous. You want to cross the road by yourself? No, don't do that. Up until your way, I think my children are capable of crossing the road, but Effie's like, nah, I don't care. If there's no roads, if there's no cars in sight, they're not doing it. For me, just cross. So even how they view life is being shaped and molded. Okay, and this in turn translates to how then we relate to women when we grow up. There's a general saying, you may not have heard of it, but it says that men tend to pick their mothers when they're picking who they're going to marry. It's very, very interesting. Like there's certain traits that are in your mum that when we pick our wives, we either subconsciously or consciously pick those same traits. 1 Corinthians 13 verse 11. 1 Corinthians 13 verse 11. You are familiar with this text. It says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. Okay? Spoke, thought, reasoned. Then I became a man, which almost puts the responsibility on himself. And how do we know that it was him and not just time? He says, I gave up childish ways. So he's saying this, it got to a point in my manhood where I realized I'm not a boy anymore, I'm a man. And there was a transition. I begin to give up the old things and embrace the new things. So there comes a time when every single man in this room, every single boy becomes a man. So it's not like a slow, gradual thing, and all of a sudden one day you wake up, I'm a man. No, you become one. It's very interesting that in the Jewish culture, the bar mitzvah is when they say to a young man that you're now a man. And does anyone know how old they are when they have their bar mitzvah? 13 years old. Young. Like to our modern minds, the way, it's like, no, you're not a man until you're in your mid-20s, early 30s when you've... But in the old traditional culture, you would leave your young teenagers to look after the sheep. We think, oh, that's an easy job to do. No, because sheep would get attacked by wild animals. And you're leaving that to a young boy, David being an example, because they understood something. When you get to a certain age, you become a man. And then the question is, when is that time? What does it look like? How does it feel? How do I know I've transitioned from boyhood to manhood? The verse tells us it's when you give up some things. I gave up childish things, and that's how I know I became a man. So there's so many things that we can talk about what boys need to give up in order to transition into manhood. But it's interesting that the word give up here means to render useless, or to look at something and say that's no longer productive in my life. That's unprofitable, it's powerless, it's empty, it's meaningless. I want to bring this to an end. I want to destroy and annihilate it. But it also means to be free from something. I want to break away from this and I want to be free from it. So what does this mean, men? It means we move from immaturity to maturity. We're talking about maturity, from manhood, from boyhood to manhood. Okay, so you leave immaturity behind and you embrace maturity. All of us have immaturity in us. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. We like banter or just being silly sometimes. But when it comes to just areas of responsibility, you have to make a decision, a conscious choice. I'm no longer going to be immature in this area. I don't want to be a boy in this area. We move from being dependent to being independent. And again, this is a very powerful transition. We'll talk about it more the next time we meet. But there's something about a man when you are no longer dependent on people. You are solely responsible for yourself. You can move out and live by yourself and fund yourself. Or if you're still at home with mum and dad or just mum, you're able to function independently. You don't have to be told what to do. You don't have to be woken up. You don't have to be asked to do the very common things that you should do. Like, for example, just making a bed or brushing your teeth or having a shower. That doesn't have to be something you're told to do. You're now dependent. I'm home, but I'm dependent. I'm independent. You move from being weak to being strong, from being scared or fearful about things to being courageous, from following to leading, right? Men, you can't follow all your lives. You have to at some point get to a point where you say, you know what, I'm a leader in my own right, and begin to make decisions and move forward in life. We go from being quiet to speaking, and from little to much. And we can go on and on and on. This is what maturity looks like, from boyhood to manhood. But there's another key area here. There's so many, but this is what we're focusing in on. We have to also move away from our bonds to our mothers. That sounds like it's harsh. It sounds like, what kind of preaching is this? But bear with me, we're going somewhere with this. The key here is that you do it. What all of these transitions are choices that you and I make ourselves. Time is not going to do it. We have to do it. And so the question then becomes, why is it that in our society we don't see a lot of men moving from boyhood to manhood? We don't see it, right? The reason is, I think it is to do with the dynamic of the mother and son relationship. And it's deep. There's power dynamics between mum and sons. There is psychological realities. There are spiritual bonds. And in order to move from being a boy to a man, you have to contend with all of these. I want to read you straight from a story. It's not from the book, but I just verbatim. Listen to this. Jason Bradshaw grew up in a middle-class home. He was the oldest of 3 kids and was the only son. His parents loved each other. But when Jason was 12, tragedy struck their family. Jason's father was killed in a car accident. The family was devastated, and Jason's mother grieved for several years. As Jason got older, his mother poured her life into him. He was the apple of her eye, and she often saw her husband in him as he got older. He looks much like his father, she thought to herself. His mother doted on Jason, and sometimes Jason reacted to what felt smothering to him. Jason's mother often prevented Jason from doing things that normal boys of his age do, for fear of him getting hurt or even losing Jason. Gradually, Jason began to feel controlled and manipulated by his mother. This developed into a love-hate relationship with his mum. On one hand, he knew he was now the male head of the family and wanted to care for his mum, but he hated the control that he felt. Now, I think some of you can probably relate to that story. I'm reading it, and it struck me how, because the whole thought of it is expanded later on, especially in the realm of marriage. So we're not going to go too deep into that. That's best saved for probably a marriage seminar. But I'm telling you now, your relationship with your mother will play out for the rest of your lives, especially if we don't see it. How does it play out? In 3 specific ways. There could be more, but based on the chapter that I read, chapter 2 of the book that we're reading, I could draw out 3 ways. Number 1, when men feel smothered and overprotected by their mums, especially in this dynamic when the dads are not around and mum becomes the mother figure and the father figure, so to speak, one of the ways that men will lash out or react or respond to that is that in order to feel like a man, they rebel against the authority of their mother, and they end up becoming very dominant over women. They want to dominate and conquer. They have multiple girlfriends or sex partners. They hate being told what to do by anyone who's female. They don't listen to female teachers, female police officers, any female authority, because what they're doing is psychologically they're rebelling against their mum, but they're doing it to every single woman that they come across. They become aggressive and dominant, and this is so that they can prove, I'm actually in control. My mum's not in control, I'm in control. How it plays out in marriage is every time when they get married, if their wife says to them, I think we should do things this way, or they have a criticism against something that was said or done, they feel controlled and criticized. Rather than it being just a conversation, they feel like, no, you're trying to control me. And so they push back against that, even with their girlfriends or their wives or whatever the case may be, because in their minds, I can't escape from mum. Wherever I go, there she is. I've left the house, but I see her in my girlfriend, I see her in my teachers, and I don't want that control that I had when I was growing up. The second way it plays out is some men become dependent on their mums. So much so that dependency is carried out throughout all of their relationships. They end up having relationships where they're being looked after. They don't have a clue what's happening day to day, as long as the significant other in their relationship, whether it's their mum, their girlfriend, their wife, their older sister, whatever the case may be, is taking care of things, and they never seem to grow into manhood because they're always dependent. They literally feel powerless around women. Women seem to be the people that have the most control. They know what they're doing. They're consistent, and it's what they grew up with, because dad wasn't around. The only one that was consistent and there and proved to be of some sort of powerhouse to them were their aunties and their grandmothers and their mums. And so as a result, they feel this. They project the same emotions or same feelings to every woman they come across. Or, more commonly than the first two, because not most men won't dominate or become, that kind. The most common one, they become distant. They become distant from women, from whether the family members but specifically to their wives, because they don't want to be emotionally vulnerable, or they have bonded with their mothers past the point that they're supposed to be bonded with their mothers. And as a result, they can't bond with any other woman, so they're always distant. So you have to be very careful with this, because you can end up getting married to someone and you can't emotionally connect with them because you're still bonded to mummy. Let me give you a true story. This is a true story. A wife is complaining to her husband. She says, just to let you know, it's in the context of a counseling session. The husband and wife have gone to a counselor to speak about their marriage. This is what came out. On Mother's Day, this is the wife speaking, you made sure that your mother got to sit at the head of the table and was waited on first. He retaliated, well, it is Mother's Day. His wife defensively said, but I'm a mother. In fact, I'm the mother of your children. But that doesn't seem to carry any weight with you. And then his response to that is, I'm not going to stop loving my mother just to make you happy. Now, that almost sounds like a normal conversation. Like, you're almost like, yeah, but that makes sense. That's your mum. But I want you to think about the dynamics here. He is failing to honor his own wife and put her on the pedestal that she ought to be in place of her mother. Of his mother. His mother has become such a thing that he's now distant emotionally from his own wife. This becomes an issue, especially when we grow and have relationships. If you have these dynamics playing out within your own personal relationship with your mum, and I'll be honest with you, I read the chapter, I thought, okay, this is quite deep. I read an article that went deeper into some of the dynamics, and I saw myself in many of those examples. And it's scary, but it's good because it made me realize, okay, there's areas in my life that need improvement. Because here's the thing, there's no woman, this again, those are going to get married one day, who wants to be dominated by a man, right? There's no woman that wants to be told what to eat, where to go, what time to come back, just total dominance. At the same time, there's no woman that wants to be depended on by a man, right? They're not really, generally speaking, built for the pressures that we can handle in the makeup that how God has made us. So, they don't want to have to be worrying about the children and the bills and the mortgage and your spirituality and just looking after you like how mum looks after you or looked after you. Generally speaking, women want someone that will be a leader and not a follower. And there is no woman that wants a relationship where the man is distant emotionally. So the question then becomes, what is your relationship with your mum like? It's a sobering question, and it's a real question, because some men have a perpetual fear of displeasing their mums, which they project on other women, or leaving. I don't want to ever abandon, she's been through so much, I don't want to ever leave her. I don't want to, you know what I mean? Like, it stifles your growth as a man. Think about the words that you've heard as you're growing up. Don't climb that tree. Stop jumping up and down. Stop breaking your toys. If you keep breaking your toys, I'm not going to buy you any new ones. Right? Why? Because you're taking the truck and the car and you're you know what I mean? Like, you're replaying car accidents. And no. Stop fighting with your brothers. Why can't you guys be nice to each other? And words like, why can't I rely on you? Why is it that I always have to do everything for you? And you compound those words with all these other things that our mums say, out of love, by the way. We're not knocking this, but this is out of love. They don't want you to get hurt. I remember when, I've shared this with you before, but the tree in our garden, the boys climbed right to the top. Dangerous. And when Effie found out, she screamed at them, like, get down from that tree. When I found out, I was like, well, good on you. If you break an arm, hey, listen, it's part of growing up. But they did it a number of times. Eventually, she conceded. She was able to understand, like, this is what boys do. And I have to let them fight. I have to let them. Sometimes, you get. But it's just trying to get that balance. And we don't always get it right. Don't get me wrong. But if you grew up without a man in your life, then it's most likely that you kept hearing things that literally go against the grain of your masculinity, as opposed to play along with it. Okay, so if a mother is not getting her emotional needs met through her husband or her partner, whatever the case may be in that home, she may attempt to draw those emotional needs from her son. So either the father is totally absent physically, or he's not there emotionally because he's distant from his wife for whatever reason. He just sees her as the thing that you sleep with and that washes things and cleans things, and that's all he sees her as, right? If he is emotionally distant, then she will then project what she should be projecting on her husband, on her children, namely her sons, if she has it. She may attempt to draw that from her son. And so for some men, the bond between a mother and son goes on beyond adolescence and ruins a lot of relationships. But with men, what needs to happen is once you start reaching adolescence, you need to actually start pulling away from that bond. There's some people that have said that boys are not wired to bond with any female. Sorry, I actually wrote that wrong. Boys are not wired to bond with their mums after a certain age when they get into adolescence, because that bond is now reserved for their sexual counterparts. So just to try and explain what this means, once you get to a certain age, you start distancing yourself from your mum a little bit, and you start to look at girls differently. And the way you look at them is like, rah, this, you know, you're going through some things. Most of you are above that age now, but you kind of like, you see girls in a sexual way. Nothing, you know, really wrong with that unless it plays out to fantasy and lusting. And it's just the way we are made. But if you are still bonded to your mum at that age, and she's the main focal point, it causes you to be distant. And so what needs to happen naturally is at some point the man in the home draws the sons away from the mum and leads them into masculinity, and that bond between them and the mum, it's not like it's severed and it doesn't exist. Your mum will always be mum. It's just that the attachment, the unhealthy attachment, is then loosened. When they should be growing independent from their mothers during this time, they find themselves in bondage to their mother's emotional control, and all of this happens subconsciously. So I want to read you a quote from the book. It says, when a boy reaches puberty, ruled with the powerful physical stirrings of his emerging manhood, the father's role becomes critical. If at this point dad doesn't call the boy out and away from the mother to bond with his masculine roots among men, those strings are overtaken by his natural physical bond with the mother, becoming bound up in her and thus unavailable later to the woman he loves. That is a powerful quote. I bought a second-hand book. Yeah.
I think I read this.
Oh, let me show. I'll read it again. I bought a second-hand book, and whoever had owned it before me marked the same passage, because it's very potent. When a boy reaches puberty, ruled with the powerful physical stirrings of his emerging manhood, the father's role becomes critical. If at this point dad doesn't call the boy out and away from the mother to bond with his masculine roots among men, those stirrings are overtaken by his natural physical bond with the mother, becoming bound up in her and thus unavailable later to the woman he loves. Okay, so let's take a few examples here. Tiger Woods, very successful, beautiful wife, can't remember her name, Erin or Enin or something like that, and he cheats on her, covers it up, and it goes on and on and on. Then we discover that his father was unemotionally available, cheated on his mum regularly, and his first wife, he would call her, Tiger Woods would call her in tears, saying, my dad is with another woman right now. They never separated, but the home, they eventually separated when he was an adult, but the home was always jacked up. So now he's older, he's married, and he's unemotionally attached to his wife. He can't be, because he's trying to still assert his own manhood, but outside of the home by looking at other women. And you're almost like, this doesn't make any sense. Your wife is beautiful. You are rich. You are famous. Why would you need to humiliate yourself in this way? It's because of these very things that we're talking about. Let's talk about Bill Clinton. Everyone knows, I'm guessing, what Bill Clinton did a couple years ago, about 20 years ago. Monica Lewinsky. So, most powerful man in the world at that time. He cheats on his wife, lies about it, gets caught out, he's humiliated, has to leave the office. And then we find out that his dad died when he was still in the womb. And every relationship his mother had after that was with alcoholics and abusive men. So the only consistent and constant security Bill Clinton had was in his mum. She was the only consistent thing that he had. He had no positive role models. Every male role model he had was negative. So he learned to seek confirmation of his manhood from women. So the more powerful he felt, the more validated he needed to be. And where does his validation come from? His mum. So now Monica Lewinsky. But since no woman, listen to this, there is no woman on earth that is capable of validating your manhood. It doesn't matter if you are dominant over them, you'll never feel like you've dominated enough to become a man. It doesn't matter if you are dependent on women, you'll never feel so comfortable in your own skin. But no woman will ever be able to do that for you. And all the distancing you and I do will never fill this gap, because if Bill Clinton, if Tiger Woods, if you and I don't go to the source, which is our Father in heaven, for this wound, this masculine wound, then we have condemned ourselves to the fruitless exercise of going from woman to woman seeking manhood, or from seeking our manhood from one woman. It's a fruitless exercise. The only validation that you and I are going to get as men is from the Father himself, which is very interesting, because once we get to heaven, we are all children of one Father. If I can solely tap into that and identify with that and understand that God is my Father and all my needs are met through my relationship with him, it frees me from the bondages that I have on earth. It frees me to be the man that I want to be. I read another article about a young boy who was taken by his uncle and his dad to this getaway where they would go fishing, and it was just all men, 15 of them, whatever. I don't know the numbers, but and whilst they're there, this is a secular environment, so they're drinking their beers, they're laughing, blah blah blah. This young boy noticed something. The men here, they talk differently to when they're around the women. They're a bit more freer. When they want to go toilet, they don't like, okay, let's get some hand sanitizer, and they just go to the bush and just wee in the they come back, and he learned something in that particular environment, that this is an environment where men are free to be themselves and men are free to be men. There's just something very freeing about that when you realize I don't need to be in an environment to be a man. I can be a man anywhere, in any environment. Think about what Jesus said about marriage. He said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother. And that word leave, coincidentally, is very much the same as, when I became a man, I left childish ways. So think about what he's saying. A man shall render useless and unproductive his father and mother. A man shall see his father and mother as unprofitable, powerless, empty, unmeaning, bring to an end, destroy, annihilate. So I'm exaggerating here because this word means so much. But one of the way you can translate it is just simply this: free. Free. A man shall be freed from the authority of his mother and his father, and start afresh and create a new environment with his wife. Powerful stuff. And there's so much I wanted to say, but I would have had to speak for another half hour. So we're going to do a part 2 of this. Part 2 will cover, what do I need to practically do now that I know this? What changes can I implement? What can I do? How can I recognize it in myself and in others, etc., etc. And we're going to delve a little bit deeper into that, get into a bit more scripture. And there's an illustration that was used in the book, which I want to elaborate on. Very, very powerful about this. For those who read it, the guy who was grabbing men and he was finally arrested. Powerful illustration, but we'll talk about that next time. But for now, I'll leave you with this. Just know that we all come from, as we said right at the beginning, foundations that have been destroyed by wickedness. You recognize that. You recognize that your righteousness, your relationship with God doesn't fix it automatically. You have to purposely, once you see it, What can I do to fix it? How can I be a man in this arena? And just realize, you know what, I don't want my culture or the way I view adults and all that kind of stuff to muddy the water and make what is clear muddy. I am a man and I'm going to grow as a man. Okay, comments, questions, observations.
I was going to say